Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Now more than ever, the transportation trucking industry is huge. You think about Amazon alone and how many more vehicles are out there transporting goods. We always had that happening since the beginning of transportation. Who governs that? Who helps companies make sure that things are safe? This guy is one of them. And this is Safety First. That's our podcast today with a guy that has worked as a safety investigator for many years, has trained both law enforcement and motor carriers. And especially if you're a company that offers transportation, does transportation, or a motor carrier, he makes sure things are safe. Matt Freeman joins us once again. Welcome, Matt. How you doing?
Hey, doing well. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And today we're going to talk about hours of service when a vehicle or an employee is transporting. It's counted by the hours that they're in service. Let's go a little bit deeper in that. Do I have that definition broadly correct?
Partially, yeah. So anytime a driver is in a commercial motor vehicle, sorry, they have to keep track of their time. If it's by a timesheet, set up a paper logbook or a digital, an EOD, electronic logging device. So those are the three key ways that they are required per regulations under. So that's, when you're looking at time, whenever they're doing their daily, regardless of where they're going, local, interstate, long haul, short haul, they have to keep track of their hours.
What are the guidelines? I always wonder about that. How many hours you're allowed to work until you have to take a break?
So you have your 10 or 11 hour rule. Just your everyday driver. Now there are some exceptions to depending on the field that they're in, where they may get a little longer of drive time, depending on where they are. Okay. So how it basically works, you got 11 hours of drive time. Okay. On duty driving. And then you have your 14, and you have 11 and 14 hour. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. You have 11 and 14 hour rule. So you have a total of 14 hours on duty time. Okay. In that 14 hours, you have 11 hours of drive time that you can do. Okay. With the drive time, depending on what you're doing is how it's going to be kept track of. They changed not too long ago, last few years, where they have what they call a 100 air mile radius. I'm sorry, 150 air mile radius. It used to be a 100 air mile radius. They've upped it to 150. So when these guys go outside 150 air mile radius, if that is their daily to go out, they have to have what they call an EOD, okay, electronic logging device. That's how that keeps track of their time. That is the rules. Now there are some exceptions to that. If you are a driver and you go out eight times in a 30-day period, you have to be on an ELD, okay, electronic logging device, because that's outside that radius. The other thing with that is if you are a local driver and you stay within 150 radius mile, and let's say one day a week, you have to go outside that radius, they have to keep a logbook, a copy of a logbook. Okay, so you got to do a logbook page for that day. Anything with inside that 150 air mile radius, they can use what they call a log sheet, a time card. Okay, that they got to keep track of their hours on. That's the only exception and differences there. Now, again, depending on the field, there are some exceptions to the different types of services that are out there. When it comes to your utilities and construction, different things out there, oil fields, they're a little different sometimes, but that's a whole other category. But go ahead.
So I'm always skeptical, and I know that it started with paper. You could write whatever you want down in that logbook, I would imagine. Just saying. I'm going to take the other side here. So when it comes to electronic, how is that done? Is that done through GPS? Is it done through a device that's connected to the port on the engine? How is that done?
Yeah. So the EODs are connected to the vehicle. Okay. It tracks everything that the vehicle does. Um, so everywhere the vehicle goes, it's tracked. Everywhere the driver goes, it's tracked. Obviously with the driver in the vehicle. Okay. Um, so part of that is, some of these systems are set up with GPS. They're set up on a cell service. So depending where they go, everything's recorded.
Mm.
Um, so it tracks everything. Now it tracks, some of these are set up on your different types of geo radius to where, it can start your time as soon as you pull out of the driveway. Okay. So, they go by, and just tells you when the engine started, uh, other things like that, to keep track of where you're going at all times. Depending on the systems, there's so many different systems out there that these companies can literally track everywhere that truck is,
Wow.
anywhere in the country. Just depends on what system you get. There's a lot of different brands out there. We could spend just a half hour just talking about every brand that's out there. Um, so that's how it is. And yes, is the GPS set up with them? And some of them they are. It's how they're tracked.
Hmm. What other information does it log? Does it also log? I mean, obviously, if it's GPS, better, more easier to track, things like speed and things like that. But does that logging system that's connected to the engine, is it also looking at other parameters about the engine itself and how the vehicle is maintained, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a lot of the systems that are out there now, and most common systems, they have your pre and post trip inspection stuff built into them, where you have to log that into the system, so it shows that you did a pre and post trip inspection. Um, some of these will tell you when you're running. A lot of them, they're going to tell you when you're running out of hours. You can only drive so many hours. Depend on where you're going, and it's going to say, hey, you're getting close. Um,
Hmm.
So yeah, there's some things built into these systems that are required. Now there are regulations that state what it has to have to meet electronic logging device and EOD. Okay, there's been some stuff in the past where um, the government has gone back and said, "Hey, this device isn't allowed any longer." You know, um, so I always tell folks, when you get an EOD, vet it out, make sure the government is met by the government regulations and it's approved. They have to be approved. So, but yeah, one of the things I just want to say here real quick with this, so when they have to have a logging device, okay, electronic logging device in the vehicle, um, they got to have the instructions on the vehicle, okay, which is the operating manual or the EOD. Um, they had to have a minimum of 8 days paper logs in the vehicle as well. So if you're
Hmm.
driving down the road and there's a mishap, just some stops for whatever reason, you still had to track your hours. So you had to keep actual paper logs in your vehicle with you as a backup. Okay. Um, all the information must be inputted by the driver, such as form and manner. So they still have to enter information in the logging device, like you're saying. So it keeps track of everything you do, everything you input. There is actually codes, depending on how it's set up for each driver. So whenever enforcement comes in, they can say who was driving that vehicle. They can pull those logs up by that code, that's assigned.
Does this vary the hours of service? Does it vary state by state?
No.
Okay.
Well, your interstate hours of service is across the board. Okay. Um, some states may have some exceptions, again, depending on what type of operation it is. But everything is typically set your 11 to 14-hour rule. Now,
Uh,
like the state of Alaska, Um, they have some different hours as well because they're as far as time goes is different. You're here in the lower states, everything runs by 60 and 70-hour rules. Okay, your 60 and 70-hour rule is how many total on duty and drive time hours you are uh throughout a week, a period. Okay, depending if you're a 7 day or 8 day company. Okay, that's what I mean. It records every single day. If you're like an over the road guy, you're on a 70-hour rule. If you're a local company, you may be on a 60-hour rule because you're only working, say, Monday through Friday, all right, or Monday through Saturday. So you're never going to hit that. Alaska runs off a little bit different hours. They run on a little bit longer hours. They have a 70 and 80 rule for running time. So that's the only state that I know of
Hmm.
personally that has a different time setup.
So the electronic logging system, are there any that are, I'm going to put this very loosely, like the black box on a plane where something goes wrong and you can refer back to it? Is there any other information that's gathered from those logging devices aside from hours and maybe basic stuff?
It's pretty much recording everything the vehicle does. It's going to show the runtime, when you turn it on, turn it off. Um, so some of these devices can show issues with the vehicle.
Hmm.
Like if something's going on. It just really depends on the brand.
Right.
It's really all over the board. I mean, I usually try to be a little more specific, but on some of those brands, it just depends on what you're getting, what they can do for you. They all have different systems. Some of these systems, you can order onboard and outboarding cameras. Uh, you know,
Ah,
uh, it
yeah,
goes
actually,
along.
that was going to be a question I was going to bring up. Are there any regulations, any guidelines where cameras have to be placed in a vehicle? And what are your thoughts on it? Do you think whether there are or not, what are your feelings on it?
As of right now, I don't know of any laws that says you have to have a camera, or inboarding, outboarding. Um, I'm totally for the cameras. It can work against you and it can work for you
Hmm.
in a matter of law. Uh, Drivers for my customers, a lot of them were very indifferent about being recorded all the time, in the cab. But
Mm.
once they got used to it and realized from just talking with my folks, it doesn't bother them anymore. They know why they're there. They've seen. Give you an example. I was just talking with a customer not too long ago, and a vehicle. The driver had gone back into the shop and said, "Hey, can you run the footage on my camera from yesterday?" And supervisor's kind of like, "Okay, what'd you do wrong?" Because could have went against him.
Mhm.
Well, a vehicle had pulled out, cut across traffic, and just barely missed the truck when he swerved in front of him. I'm talking like just a little bit. And so he wanted to go in and say, how close was I from hitting that vehicle? He talked to the supervisor and he said, "Hey, this is why I like the camera
Mm.
because it showed me how close this incident could have been and whose fault, if there was a fault there." So it does save it. It does go back, and you know what they did? He said he took that video and he showed it in his next safety meeting,
Ah.
saying how close. That was a discussion, how close and why we have these cameras. So it's getting a little bit more
Huh.
respected.
Interestingly, we talk about those cameras. Let's say that somebody put something on social media. I can't believe this truck, yeah, insert name of truck, it's on the side of the truck, came to me and blah, 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 blah. But it might have been the driver's fault, but the camera catches it. But you talked about cameras in the cab. Um, yeah, I think those are two radically different things. And I get it, having a camera
Mhm.
on you while you're driving for 18 hours, 7, 16, whatever. Um, is one thing, but having a view around you is another thing.
Yeah, a lot. Sometimes, the inside cameras. You're looking for distracted driving. Was the driver doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing? Was he on his cell phone? Which you can't have a cell phone in use with your hand, uh, while you're driving a commercial motor vehicle. And again, a lot of states, even everyday vehicles, they had to be hands free. Um, so there's many reasons they use the onboarding cameras. Um, I'm indifferent with it. Again, it's just a matter of a company's decision. It's not required. But the GPS systems, the tracking systems that come with these devices, when someone steals your vehicle, they have the tracking devices set up and depending on companies you go with, they can track the trailers, the vehicles wherever they go. It's been very beneficial, at least with the customers I work with when, vehicles are stolen.
Ah,
Um, so they can track those vehicles. providing that whoever steals them doesn't find the tractor, and removes
Right.
it.
Right.
Those things happen. But the devices they have out there now that go along with the logging devices, uh, it's pretty amazing what comes with them now.
Let's take a typical weekly trek of somebody that does interstate and, let's say they're doing quite a few hundred miles. What
Mhm.
does their day or week look like? Well, let's say they're, day one, they're driving X amount of hours. And I don't know, I'd love you to fill in the blanks so you can take us through the journey of a trucker that is doing a lot of work here. Um, how much downtime they have, where they
Mhm.
sleep, be it in the cab or a hotel, um, and the maximum what they can do in terms of driving and then back in the vehicle after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely great question, and it brings us right back onto the hours of service. So you have let's say you have a driver and he drives he's right at his 11th hour. Okay. So in order to start his time over, he's required to have a 10-hour break. Okay. So let's say he drives from uh, 8 to 5, whenever he hits his 10 hours, whatever it may be, now, or 11 hours. Now he has to take a 10-hour break. Okay. In order to start that over. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, Whenever enforcement's looking at their logbooks, that's what they're looking for. When did he start and when did he stop and when did he take his break? So it constantly rolls over on that 60 or 70-hour rule. Okay. So what used to happen, I've seen in my past, is you'd get a driver who would he'd take his 10 hours, but he'd only show 9.5. Okay. It starts logging. Let's say he starts the engine. He hasn't drove off yet, but it automatically shows that he's up. He's moving. He's not completely off.
Wow.
So what would happen, again, you hear me talking about the trickle effect a lot of times uh, in the past here. If a driver doesn't take that full 10 hours off as required, that trickles to the next day. So therefore it shows that he's missing some time. Okay. So now you're rolling over in violations. So now you got another 11-hour rule, another 11-hour rule. You see, so until he takes that full 10 hours off, that's when that time resets.
Wow.
Um, and I'm being very, very basic based on that. The
Sure.
one thing with the hours of service rules and regulations is majority of those rules and regulations are critical or acute violations. Okay. Very few of them are are just a violation. Okay. When you start accruing those as critical and acute violations, that starts to affect the safety rating uh, of that rule. Okay. And we talked about last week and kind of how on the ratings and therefore of what the companies get. So hours of service is always a big one. Um, most of these drivers, um, when it was the paper logs, is really easy to find all these things. Now with electronic logs, a lot of these devices tell you, hey, you better take a break.
Hmm.
You're getting close to time, things like that. There's different messaging systems that can come across, from dispatch, through those EODs to let them know, whatever the dispatch has for them. So they're very useful. It can do a lot of things for a driver.
I'm curious. I want to go back to what you said in that a driver's taking his break and turn the engine on. Now, I don't know how that works. If you're, let's say it's a big truck, you're sleeping in the cab, you turn the engine
Mhm.
on for whatever reason, heat, I don't know, want to watch TV, whatever it might be, and that could potentially log right there that he's mobile.
Well, it can show them. It'll show that the unit's on. Okay, and depending on how they have their system set up when they start moving, there's a speed. There's also speed there. If they're cruising, if they're just still in the parking lot and they're backing up or they're
Mhm.
pulling forward, whatever, that system, unless it's set otherwise, will start recording. Okay. So again, it records everything that vehicle does. Some of them are set to not turn on until after, say, 15 mile an hour. Okay. Or whatever it may be. They have what they call, I keep saying they have geo fencing. So like, again, if it's in the yard, okay, you got a geo fence set up. So once soon it actually pulls out of the yard and hits the roadway, everything kicks in. So that's what I'm talking about there. It just depends on how it's set up. Some drivers don't pay attention, and they start early. They don't realize they still have a half hour, or it just depends when everything starts recording now. And I just tell folks, it kind of looks odd when you see a system and everything's at 9.5 hours. It's like, why is it showing that? There's repetition here, what's going on. And sometimes it's just the driver's not paying attention, of what he's checking on. Sometimes he's only getting 9.5 hours. You just don't know.
Does this all come into play, the hours of service? Does it vary between the vehicles? If it's a big rig, if it's a smaller truck, is it essentially the same? It's more about the area that the truck covers. How does that work?
Yeah, no, it is. Any commercial motor vehicle by definition, okay, in running in interstate commerce, 10,001 pounds or greater, okay, that's your non-CDL.
Okay.
Okay. If it goes outside that 150 air mile radius, it's got to have a logbook, an EOD. Okay. If it's within, it still has to have some type of time card. So it doesn't really matter as long as if they meet the definition of a commercial motor vehicle, all the rules can and may take effect depending on intrastate or interstate driving.
So, strange question. I'm going to go hypothetical now. We have somebody who is driving. They have an engine issue. They stop to see if they can get that fixed. Does that stop time count as their break time? That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. It really is. It depends on how they log it.
Okay.
If they're going to count that as their 30-minute break, it's going to be on duty, not driving time.
I didn't know there was a designation for that. Okay.
Yeah. So you have on a logbook, you have drive time, you have on duty time, you have off duty, and you have sleeper berth. Okay. So depending on what category, it is a graph. It's going to look like this. Okay. Depending how they are. If they're driving so many hours, they take a break, but they're required to log. And that's what the electronic logging device does. And it logs everything they do. Some systems you have to manually put in your time. Some systems automatically record it. Again, it just depends on which system they're using. I'm talking very general because there's so many different ones out there. I've seen some use their phone. There used to be phone apps that they would use. Most of these but they still had to be connected with, on the engine, the system. They all, anybody that's in a commercial motor vehicle, these hours, hours of service regulations do apply.
Amazing. Learned a lot today, Matt. This fascinating. This is, you're driving down highway, freeway, expressway. You're seeing these trucks going, and there's a lot going into the safety aspect behind what's happening there. And that's what you do, and especially helping companies that do transportation make sure it's done right. How do we connect with you if somebody's watching or listening and they are one of those companies responsible for transportation?
Yeah, you can reach me at matt@dottrainingsolutions.com. My direct number here is 573-416-8203. And or you can find out more about us on our website at dottrainingsolutions.com.
It's all about compliance.
Yes, sir. That's everything we look at.
Yeah, exactly. Matt, appreciate you. Thanks for being here today.
All right. Hey, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.